Winnipeg is finally on a roll with a season sweep of the Minnesota Wild, a third straight victory. The vibes are good, and the Jets are ready for playoffs. Almost. Find out what's next on tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets.
You're Locked On the Hockey Jets, your daily podcast on the Winnipeg Jets. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Evening, friends, and welcome to tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Harrison Lee, an avid Winnipeg Jets fan and an online blogger. You can follow me on Twitter at HLLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. As always, thanks for making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day every day. If you like what you're hearing, be sure to like, follow, and subscribe on all of your favorite podcasting platforms and YouTube. Doing so, of course, is always free of charge and ensures you never miss another episode. Most of all, though, we just love and appreciate your support. On tonight's episode, like I said, the Jets have completed the season sweep of the Minnesota Wild, winning a 4-2 game. And you know what? Generally speaking, this was a pretty good front-to-back game with only a couple of problem areas. And it really only came on a couple of shifts against Minnesota's top line, right? The Kaprizov line with Zook was absolutely cooking. But otherwise, the Jets generally controlled this game. And I think from, the start of the game to the end, Winnipeg was generally the better team. And it definitely reflected, in the scoreline. And like I said, there were some mistakes here and there, but, every game has that. And I think the most important thing is that the Jets, they came out of this on the winning end, and they thoroughly outplayed the Wild in almost all aspects. Funny enough, it was only really the special teams where Winnipeg really had some noticeable slip-ups that actually led to scoring, because otherwise, at even strength at least, the Jets were generally pretty okay until Kaprizov was on the ice. That was really the only time when Winnipeg started to struggle. But otherwise, you know what? This was a nice quality game. Hellebuyck had a pretty nice performance, and the Jets generally had some big performances from guys that you might not expect. Nemesnikov had a 3-point night. Iafallo had a 2-point night. Morgan Barron got in on the scoring, and the other supplemental scoring came from Kyle Connor on a 2-on-1. So overall, right, I think this is the kind of performance that most people would say was fairly encouraging. And I think the way that the Jets did it, which, had some smart plays, some good patience shown, for instance, let's talk about that Kyle Connor goal, right? There was a bit of a wall chip, and I forget which defender did this. They sort of cleared it out towards Winnipeg's blue line, and Perfetti recognized that the puck might have a chance to skip past him. I don't know if it touched off of him. I don't think it did, because he didn't get credit for an assist here. But I think what he did instead was almost set like a pick at the blue line on his man. And because that happened, the puck ended up skipping by, and it set up Monahan and Connor on a 2-on-1, which they absolutely did not miss. Beautiful goal. And I think it really shows some of the recent chemistry that we've seen with these lines. The chemistry of Perfetti, Connor, and Monahan has really, gelled together. They play smart hockey, and it's made a world of difference for especially Kyle Connor. I think it's been a bit of a down year for him, relatively speaking. Even by his own standards, I think he's probably been frustrated. He won't always vocalize it, but you can kind of tell in his body language and stuff. It just hasn't been a year for him that I think he'd be thrilled with. But recently, things have started to turn around a lot. He scored a goal instead of just assisting like he did the past couple of games. And I think that is going to obviously boost his confidence. But generally speaking, like his last few games, he's just played really well. And ever since Perfetti has moved on to his line, it's just been a huge change in how he approaches things. When all the responsibility kind of sits on his shoulders, and there's not somebody who can sort of account for the way that he tends to cheat a little bit for offense, I think you see so much of what a lot of us have struggled with in terms of his game being a little one-dimensional. But when he's with Cole is like a perfect safety valve, and Monahan is a great supplementary piece who just, calmly makes good offensive zone plays and just generally knows where to be at the right time. So that was a great performance, of course. But the real standout was the fourth line. The fourth line attributed or was credited with most of Winnipeg's goal scoring, lots of dirty tips, lots of chaos around the crease, and just generally bullying Minnesota's depth, which is exactly what you want to see. The trio of Barron, Iafallo, and Nemesnikov has been a huge wrecking ball, and it's been really impressive to see them just completely soften opponents. And generally speaking, Winnipeg's bottom six this whole year has usually been the lines that eat up some of the really hard matchups and also just defensively lock things down. Even if your top six was struggling, you could usually rely on your bottom six to be pretty airtight. Only a few exceptions. There was a stretch where the third line with Lowry was kind of getting caved in, and that didn't look great. But the past, I'd say, month or so, things have gone back to normal. And, with having a really lethal top six now, it makes all the world of difference for the bottom six because they can rest a little bit easier. They can maybe get a couple of different matchups, and they can sort of eat those minutes against maybe some of the tougher opponents, which will soften it up and allow the top six to maybe feast on weaker matchups. I think that's a really big, helpful thing because you can keep rolling that pressure, and the Jets can sort of pile it up against teams once they get off the top line. And it's not like Winnipeg matches up poorly against top lines either. Thanks to Ehlers, Scheifele, and Velarde, and the Connor, Perfetti, Monahan trios, you've got legitimate top six matchups, and you tack on Winnipeg's depth, and there's just a lot to work with. I guess obviously the big question is once Nino Ryder is back, who kind of comes out and who slides in. Honestly, I think there's a really good argument that a lot of these guys have deserved their ice time and really have taken it and run with it. My hope is that you might look at somebody on the fourth line instead here and maybe move Nino into Appleton's spot. I think if you have Mason running on your fourth line, that's going to be phenomenal. So, like I said, I think that there's a lot to like with this team. The Jets have tons of 10-plus goal scorers on the squad, which, we've never really seen something that balanced. Sure, Winnipeg might not have any 50-goal scorers, but they're getting contributions all up and down the lineup, and I think that is, in and of itself, a very positive development. So a lot to like in this game, a big performance. Obviously, the Wild aren't a great team, but they are pretty decent, and they were still hovering around that playoff spot. I think at this point, their playoff hopes are definitely dusted, but they were still enough to be a pest for at least some of the more mediocre teams. Against quality opponents, they have generally struggled this year. So again, you may not want to use it as like a huge litmus test, but I think in terms of the Jets continuing to build chemistry with the lines that they have and stuff, that is probably the most important outcome. And we'll talk about why it's really critical for the Jets to keep doing this because, I think the more that we see this from the coaching staff, the more likely it is that the Jets are going to have a much better time in the playoffs. And look, I can't even say that, the first round is going to be a lock for the Jets. I think, it could be a really tough opponent. The Central Division being the way that it is this year just means you're going to face a team that's honestly in cup contender categories. So we'll have to just sort of be patient and see how the Jets do. But one of Winnipeg's opponents is actually playing right now, perhaps their likely first-round opponent, and things don't seem to be going super well for this team. We'll talk about who that is and how the Jets can keep, the momentum going, perhaps against this team in just a little bit. Before we go any further, though, I do want to shout out our friends and partners at Robinhood Retirement. Did you know that even if you have a 401k for retirement, you can still have an IRA? Robinhood has the only IRA that gives you a 3% boost on every dollar you contribute when you subscribe to Robinhood Gold. But get this, now through April 30th, Robinhood is even boosting every single dollar you transfer in from other retirement accounts with a 3% match. That's right, no cap on the 3% match. Robinhood Gold gets you the most for your retirement thanks to their IRA with a 3% match. This offer is good through April 30th. Get started at robinhood.com/boost. Subscription fees apply. And now for some legal info. Claim as of Q1 2024 validated by Radius Global Market Research. Investing involves risk, including loss. Limitations apply to IRAs and 401ks. 3% match requires Robinhood Gold from 1 year from the date of first 3% match. Must keep Robinhood IRA for 5 years. The 3% matching on transfers is subject to specific terms and conditions. Robinhood IRA available to U.S. customers in good standing. Robinhood Financial LLC member SIPC is a registered broker-dealer. Hello, friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Every day, thank you so much for rejoining us on tonight's episode as we are just talking about, some really fun stuff with the Jets. Obviously, Winnipeg has been rolling the past couple of games, 3-game win streak. Things finally feel like the team is sort of back on track, I would say. It's been a while since Winnipeg played consistently quality hockey against good opponents. Past few games, you're not exactly facing every top team, but I would say, compared to some of the weak squads like Columbus and those teams that the Jets were beating on earlier, this is a tougher slate, and it's about to head into a very tough slate where we're really going to get a sense of what this team is made of. Obviously, this stretches, the stretch against really the heart of the best teams in the Central. And we start off on Tuesday with the Nashville Predators. Then on Thursday, you've got the Dallas Stars. And Saturday, we get probably a playoff preview of sorts against the Colorado Avalanche. So very interesting for a lot of reasons. But, before we talk about why I think it's really important for the Jets to keep forging ahead with the current lineup, barring one or two changes I might be interested in looking at, I did want to let you know about something really cool that the Locked On Network is doing. Are you somebody who watches Fox Sports and ESPN on your TV all day? Do you find you have to turn down the volume with all the shouting? Make the switch to Locked On Sports today instead, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel programmed for you daily, bringing you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. Subscribe to Locked On Sports Today, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Now, like I said, I think the Jets are in a pretty good spot, generally speaking, with how the lineup is right now. I think, generally speaking, how the top six is arranged gives the Jets a lot of matchup ability, which is fantastic, right? Winnipeg, earlier this season, when they faced, say, the Dallas Stars or even Vancouver in their bad loss, you kind of saw why it was so hard for the Jets to create offense. For one thing, the top six didn't really have an optimal arrangement, and the sheer talent and skill up and down the lineups of Dallas and Vancouver gave the Jets absolute fits, which it's a tough one, right? If you are a team like the Jets, you know that you're not going to have star power that quite lines up to a Nathan McKinnon, or I would say Jason Robertson might be more in Winnipeg's target range, but the thing with the Stars is that across all three of their top 9 lines, there's just a lot of depth and skill. And we see right now, actually, their power play is absolutely torching the Colorado Avalanche. So this team is just built to score. They're built to create. And defensively speaking, generally a pretty tough team. I will say that, from Dallas's perspective, their one potential weakness is in net. Ottinger has kind of been a little bit up and down this season. Past couple of games, I think he's generally gotten things a little bit more on track, but it's hard to rely on him in the same way that you look at, say, Connor Hellebuck, right? So, that might be a place where the Jets have an advantage. But now the Jets are also going to be pretty okay at even strength. I think that's the big thing. If the Jets can stay, with it as they currently are, keep your top six mostly intact, right? Not really looking for any changes. Keep Tyler Toffoli in your bottom six where he can provide some really elite scoring depth and maybe make an adjustment or two on the deep pairings. I think you have a team that is primed to be one of the best in the Central. I think the biggest problem with this team throughout the season, especially more so in the second half than the first, is that when they had pieces that could be elevated into key roles, the Jets instead hurt themselves and kind of shot themselves in the foot by, either burying them with combos that didn't work or just not really giving them enough ice time. That has started to shift recently. I think Cole Perfetti is a great example because more recently, Perfetti has been playing late in third periods, which I know that sounds really silly to even spotlight, but he's playing now more often, and I think that is a very positive development. The fact that he's out there, at times with maybe 5 minutes remaining, a few months ago would have been unthinkable. But now he's out there. He's making good defensive reads. He's a super smart player, and I think finally, whether it was by accident or not, the coaching staff has recognized what they have in him, and that's great, right? I know that it took way too long for them to figure it out, but hey, it's better late than never. He's adding some points to his repertoire, continues to show why I have a lot of faith in him and why I think a lot of the calls to trade him were a little hasty and premature. He's a guy that, if he had gone to another team, I think would have been a huge problem for the Jets, right? You would not get anywhere near his value, and I think his true and highest value is as a member of the Winnipeg Jets. This is a kid that's going to be here for a while. I am excited to see him continue to build on the platform of tool sets that he has really grown and shown. All he needs is skilled line mates to work with and the ice time to match. So I think for me, it's just sticking with what you've got now. You've got some really good line combos. You have almost all of them above 50% expected goal share, which I know that may not always manifest into actual goals, but look, if you're going to lose, then you need to have a good process at least, right? Go down swinging, give it your best shot. If it doesn't work, you're not going to win every game, and that's okay, right? But the main thing is that you keep playing the right way, and I think the Jets have not only played the right way, but they've actually gotten rewarded for it. Great to see. The only areas where they really do have some continued warts is definitely on the power play, which Velarde has helped a bit. But the PK, yeah, different story. The PK just, I don't know what is wrong with that unit. I don't understand why there's no pressure on puck carriers or why they give so much space and deference to opposing teams. But thankfully, the power play and PK are not the biggest things that you really need in the postseason. You know, your 5v5 play tends to have a much stronger correlation to how you do in the postseason, right? So your even strength play, that is the foundation and cornerstone of your playoff success. And so far, the Jets seem to be acing that. So good news for the Jets. Keep with it. Don't make too many weird tweaks. I know Bones has done that in the past, but now that he's kept the lineup the past few games together, and generally speaking, they've won those games in pretty impressive fashion, maybe he finally has the body of evidence he needs to not make adjustments. The only time I'd really say, mix it up is if something really looks broken. But so far, from what I'm seeing, the Jets are playing really good hockey. And if they can continue it against these next couple of opponents, and even just splitting the series, I guess not really the series, but the next 3 games, if you get like 3 out of 6 points, I'd feel pretty good about that. 4 out of 6 points, flipping fantastic. You get 6 out of 6 points or even 5 out of 6 points, you're laughing all the way to the bank, especially if the Jets do it in fashion, like I said, where they're outplaying their opponents. They do that, and really the sky's the limit, right? The vibes could be in a really good position, and maybe, the fan base is going to be on board. And speaking of which, I think I also want to spend a little bit of time closing out on that, because right now it feels like the fan base is starting to buy into it again. And, in terms of my own personal interest, I'm feeling it. I'm ready for the playoffs. I think we all have been waiting for this team to look like a playoff squad again. Even Kevin Sawyer, who I don't always see eye to eye with on some of his commentary, has kind of been, spotlighting the right things. And that is always a good sign when you're thinking about stuff that you want to see this team get right ahead of the playoffs. Before we talk about why it's critical for the vibes to be back for the Jets, I do want to shout out our friends and partners at eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. The formula for winning championships is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors says everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has your back. With over 122 million parts for your number one vehicle, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for, and with eBay's Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time, or you get your money back. With eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home the trophy. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only, exclusions do apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit is only available to U.S. customers. Greetings, friends, and welcome to tonight's closing thoughts on this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Everydayers, thank you so much for rejoining us as we are just wrapping up really quickly with some thoughts. Obviously, the Jets have been in, recently better form, and they're outplaying opponents. They have controlled play at 5v5. The only real issue that I think people have kind of spotlighted has been, some really substandard special teams, but I mean, at this point, I'm just going to have to sort of accept it. I think if I spend any more time complaining about the power play and the PK, I may lose my mind. And you know what? If you have to sacrifice one thing, right, something where the special teams might be axed in favor of your really good 5v5 play, well then I guess I'm going to have to pick and choose my battles, right? I can only complain about so much with this team. And right now, I think, the fans honestly should be buying into this team a little more. I don't know if they're quite there yet for me. I do think the vibes have been noticeably better recently, and I'm hoping that that's the case because I really feel like when this team plays well, it's really important for the fans to make Canada Life Center an absolute fortress. The vibes being immaculate is a big deal when it comes to crowd noise, to really pumping the energy into the stadium and getting folks really excited. Right, Jets hockey hasn't really been something that I think a lot of people have taken seriously for the last few years. It wasn't even until Bones came in that I think the Jets were sort of relevant again, or even on anybody's radar as a team that could be fun and could be enjoyable to watch. And even last year, right, we had the second half season collapse that really put a bit of a pause on a lot of the excitement around the Jets. But now we have a team that looks more and more like a true championship contender, not a top team in the vein of maybe like a Dallas or a Florida or something, but a team that will absolutely keep pace with them. A team that, hey, if their circumstances break the right way, and if Hellebuyck continues to really batten down the hatches and become that elite starter, maybe we start to have that conversation where the Jets are in that tier. I think they're really close. There's a couple of things that they're still missing that I think, for me, hold them just slightly behind in that tier. But, otherwise, right, this team is really green light is go for the playoffs, right? I think this team is ready for the postseason. I think we're all really excited about it. The wideout coming back is going to be great. I know the Jets have made the playoffs the past few years, but this feels like a season where there's legitimate buzz again. There's energy and excitement. Still some cautiousness and I think a little bit of anxiety given, the weird last couple of months of play. But you know what? If the Jets have a couple of really big games against the Central Division this week, I think a lot of hearts and minds might be won over. I'm already kind of buying into it because the only thing that I was missing was the line combos that I think we really needed to see. A good top line, a good second line, and the rest will fall into place. That was pretty much all I was missing, and so far we still have it. So long as it stays that way, you got me bought in. I'm ready for the playoffs, and I hope the fans are too. I expect we'll see home sellouts pretty quickly. I think, the buzz around the Jets is really palpable. And I think the city is just ready for a team that feels like it's actually a serious contender again. We haven't seen a team like this squad in some time. Winnipeg has the potential to come away with 50 wins again this season, which they really haven't done in a very long time. So a 50-plus win season on the cards, a year where the Jets are already at the 100-point mark and feeling pretty good with the potential to go even higher than that. You know what? I'll take it, right? Look, it hasn't been perfect, and I think there's been some stuff where you ask questions about how the team has arrived at the record, but at the end of the day, the Jets are still a really good squad, and, so long as Bones doesn't impede what makes this talent special, you are going to have a very good team in the postseason. Also, one that is currently back in the driver's seat for the Jennings Trophy, which is pretty darn cool. The Panthers kind of had us cornered for a couple of games, but now that the goalie situation has sort of settled down and Winnipeg is conceding less and less again, feeling pretty good about Winnipeg coming away with that trophy, which would be really fantastic. And I think a big testament to how Hellebuyck has been, along with Brossoit. You can't really forget to give him his accolades. But overall, right, this team's defensive structure on the whole, very good. Goaltending, astronomically great. Season seemingly back on the up after a bit of a dip. So everyone get excited for Jets playoff hockey. There is still work to be done, and we'll talk about that on tomorrow's episode because, of course, the Jets are going to face the Preds first. And Nashville, I think, presents a really interesting challenge because they're one of these teams where they have first-round upset potential. And I don't know if it's going to happen, but if they face, say, I don't know, the Stars or something, I think that series could be closer than people are expecting. So we'll talk about what to expect from Nashville, whether this is a team that really does scare the Stars or whether, Dallas will probably prevail anyways. We'll get to that on tomorrow's episode. But for tonight's show, that is going to be all the time that we have. I thank you so much for making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day every day. We will see you back here tomorrow with more Jets coverage, so don't go anywhere. Have a great night. And as always, go Jets go.